Welcome to the class. We're going to be discussing the greatest, perhaps, symbol in the Jewish world of Judaism, which is the menorah, the Kabbalah of the menorah. The class is based on a maimah of the Rebbe, which he said in the year Tovshin Chav Ches, 1968, on Parshas Ba'aloischa es Haneros. The parsha of Ba'aloischa es Haneros continues directly from the parsha of Nosai. And the Torah says the following, in the beginning of the parshas Ba'aloischa. Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe leimer, Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Daber el Aharon, speak to Aharon, ve'omarta elav, and tell him the following. B'ha'aloischa es haneros, when you kindle the lights of the menorah, el mul pnei ha'menorah ya'iru shebas haneros. All 7 lights of the menorah should be towards the central shaft of the menorah. Rashi immediately comments and says, Lama nismecha parshas ha-menorah leparshas ha-nesim. Why was the discussion of the menorah put next to the parsha of the Nesim? Because in the previous parsha of Nosai, we're told about how the 12 princes of Israel, the 12 Nesim, brought dedication offerings when the Mishkan, the tabernacle, was set up. Says Rashi, what is the juxtaposition between the kindling of the menorah by Aharon and the dedication of the tabernacle, of the Mishkan, by the Nesim, by the princes? Lefi shekeshera Aaron Chanukas HaNesim, because when Aaron saw this dedication of the princes, Chol sha'oz daitoi, he felt bad. Kushaloi hoya imohem b'Chanukah, because he wasn't with them in the dedication of the Mishkan. Loihu v'loi shivtoi, not him and not his tribe. Amar loi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Hashem said to him, Chayecha, by your life, Shalacha gedola m'shalahem, yours is greater than theirs, meaning that your avodah, your service is going to be greater than theirs. Sha'ata madlik u'meitiv haneros, because you are going to kindle the lights of the menorah. So there's obviously something in the kindling of the menorah which is greater than the offerings of the princes. In the Haftorah of Parshas Ba'aloischa, we read a beautiful passage from the book of Zechariah. There, the prophet Zechariah talks of his vision of the Jewish people looking like a menorah, a golden menorah. The Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah describes how the Jewish people is compared to a menorah. And he says the following. Every soul is a candle. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, said, Neir Hashem nishmas Adam, the candle of God is the soul of man. That means that this world is spiritually dark, and God needs candles in this world to illuminate that darkness. And so he sends to the world candles, souls, each candle illuminating a specific darkness in this world. If you put all the candles together, if you gather and conglomerate all the souls together, that comes together in what we call Knesset Yisrael, the national pool of the Jewish soul, the Makor, the source of all souls, which is in the Sephira of Malchus of the world of Atzilus. And that pool of souls, all of them together, is arrayed in the form of a menorah. So when Zechariah sees the Jewish people as a menorah, the Jewish people are arrayed in 7 branches. In other words, 7 branches, 7 manifestations of the soul, that this national soul manifests itself in different ways, in 7 ways. Why 7 ways? Because they manifest the 7 sephiros of Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. How so? Some souls excel in Chesed. Internally, that's the love of Hashem. Externally, that's acts of kindness to others. The love of Hashem, as it's motivated and generated by Chesed, is called Ahava, which is Moshuch Kamayim. It's the love of Hashem which flows like water. Water makes everything grow. It's so full of pleasure. It's a loving pleasurable love of Hashem. It's calm, it's flowing. And outwardly, this results in acts of kindness. There are souls that excel in that branch. That's the branch of the menorah called Chesed. Then there's another branch of the menorah. That's called Gevura. Gevura is severity. Gevura implies yira, awe of Hashem. That's externally manifested by people being extremely pedantic and very meticulous about mitzvah observance, and very, very careful and strong and restrained in the various areas of mitzvah observance. Internally, it's standing in awe of Hashem. In fact, even the love which is generated by such awe is a fiery, passionate, strong love. That's the branch of Gevura. Then you have the third branch of the menorah, which is the branch of Tiferes. Tiferes means it's beautiful, it's blended, it's balanced. And this represents the idea of Torah learning, Limud Torah. As we know that Chesed, the paradigm, the biblical paradigm of Chesed was Avraham Avinu, Gevura was Yitzchak and Yaakov, who represents Torah, is the sphere of Tiferes. Tiferes externally also manifests itself in doing mitzvahs in a most beautiful way. Hidur mitzvah. Then you have the fourth branch of the menorah, which is that of Netzach. Netzach means to be victorious, to prevail over. And so, externally, this can mean prevailing over all obstacles that stand in the path of the service of Hashem, in Sur Meira, in turning away from evil, and in Aseh Tov, in doing good. Nothing stands in the way of the midah, of the characteristic of Netzach. Then you have the fifth branch of the menorah, which is that of Hod. Hod is submission. The idea is that one submits oneself beyond rhyme and reason. One's avodah is hoidah ala emes, admitting and submitting to the truth. The sixth branch of the menorah is Yesod. Yesod externally is communication. Internally, it's connection, hiskashrus. Truly connecting with another person, truly connecting with Hashem. That sixth branch, according to one opinion, was the Neir Ma'aravi, was the constant flame that always burnt on the menorah, because hiskashrus, because connection and deep binding is in fact a general content, an element which is in fact needed by all of the branches. And finally, the seventh branch is the Sephira of Malchus. Malchus is kingship, and it has two elements to it. Before davening in the morning, a person must think of Gadlus Haboire, the greatness of Hashem, and Shiflus Ha'adam, and the lowliness of man. So kingship is both in the greatness of the king and the lowliness and submission of the subject. When it comes to serving Hashem, the Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael b'nei malachim heim, Yidden shall serve Hashem proudly, vayigba liboy b'darkei Hashem, raising their hearts in the ways of Hashem, proud and upright and majestic, in order to serve Hashem, and at the same time with great humility. 7 branches of one menorah, all of which are lit by Aharon HaKohen, one of the 7 shepherds of Israel. Chazal, our sages, tell us there are 7 shepherds of Israel. Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, is a Raya Mehemna. Moshe is called the faithful shepherd, and that has 2 meanings. One, that he cares deeply for the sheep. He's a faithful shepherd in that every single sheep is of importance to him. But another meaning is that he shepherds faith. He makes sure to nurture each and every one of the sheep with faith. That's the job of Moshe Rabbeinu in the generation, and the extension of Moshe in each generation, whose job is to nurture the generation with faith. Then you have Aharon HaKohen in the generation, and that is the Aharon which lights up the lights of the menorah, making sure they are all El Mul Pnei HaMenorah, facing the middle shaft. What does that mean? That means that although there are different branches of the menorah, although some Jews are dominant in one of the 7, some Jews are, their main characteristic is chesed, some gvura, yiras Hashem, others in limud HaTorah, others in overcoming the Yetzer Hara, others in submission and hoidah, others in communication by word, by writing, and their connection and deep connection, others by kingship. They are all manifestations of one collective soul. Complementary, diverse, yes, but all in source one. So we can look at each soul as an individual candle, which is placed in a certain time and place to illuminate that environment. And we can look collectively at the Knesset Yisrael, at the pool of souls, as represented by the menorah. This is the vision of Zechariah. Zechariah sees the people as a menorah of 7 branches, whose job is to illuminate in the world various ways, but all made of one solid piece of gold. Now, what is fascinating is that this parsha of Baha'aloischa Saneris and the instruction of Aaron to kindle the lights of the menorah comes immediately after, as we previously mentioned, the parsha of Nosai, in which we have the bringing of the dedication offerings by the Nesiim, by the princes of Israel. Now, anybody who's read Parshas Nosai will know that there seems to be a huge amount of repetition, because the Torah repeats 12 times, almost verbatim, exactly what each Nasi brought, The only difference is the name of the Nasi, but what was actually brought was exactly the same. The Midrash picks up on this point and says that although what was brought was the same in the physical sense, however, in the spiritual sense, each brought with a different kavanah, with a different intent. So in other words, you can have two Jews doing exactly the same thing, but they vary immensely in the kavanah, in the inner dimension and intent, which is injected into what they are doing. And so it was with the 12 Nisim, with the 12 princes of Israel, all of whom brought korbanos, offerings, to dedicate the Mishkan, the tabernacle, but all of whom did it with different kavanah, and consequently, it was reckoned out 12 different times. Now, the question is an obvious question. If there were 12 princes, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 different tribes of Israel, and yet in this week's parsha, we talk about the 7-branch menorah, the Jewish people being divided into 7, then is it 12 or is it 7? Are the Jewish people split into 12, as in the 12 tribes of Israel, or in the 7 branches of the menorah? What is the difference between the 12 tribes and the 7 branches of the menorah? We actually find a very similar 12 and 7 in a different place as well. When it comes to the splitting of the sea, the Jewish people approached the sea, and as we know, Nachshon ben Aminadab jumped into the sea, and the sea split, but it actually split into 12 paths. And each shevet, each tribe, went into the sea in its own path. In the book of Yeshaya, when Yeshaya talks of the coming of Mashiach, there it says, "V'heinif yodai al hanor v'hikol l'shivin achalim," that there will also be a splitting, not of a sea, but of a river, the river Euphrates. And that will be split into 7 channels. Now, the Navi tells us, like in the days of going out of Egypt, I will show you wonders. And in fact, it says that the niflois, the wonders of the coming of Mashiach, will be even greater than the wonders of the Exodus of Egypt. So much so that we need a proof that even when Mashiach will come, we will mention the Exodus of Egypt. So it comes out that the splitting of the river into 7 is somewhat greater than the splitting of the sea into 12. Again, 12 and 7. 12 Nesiim, 12 princes, 7 branches of the menorah. 12 paths into the Yam Suf, 7 channels into over the river. What is the idea behind this? We know that Kriyas Yam Suf, the splitting of the sea, was in fact a revelation of the hidden worlds. There are worlds that are revealed, Alma de Isgalia, and there are worlds that are concealed, Alma de Iskasia. In terms of spheres, the sea is the sephira of Malchus of Atzilus, because as we descend from Malchus into the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya, there is formed an independent entity. The world of Bria, as it suggests, is the idea of bara, of creation. Creation means something from nothing. The idea that something independent exists outside of the Godhead, in the sense that it's an independent being. It has some form of independent existence, even though the fact is that it's completely dependent for its existence on Hashem, who is constantly pumping divine creative energy into it in order that it should exist. Nevertheless, externally, from the view and perspective of the person who's looking at it, it looks like an independent existence. So the sea, the water covers the sea. You can't see inside it. That's the Alma de Iskasia, the hidden worlds of the world of Atzilus. Whereas the dry land is seen. It looks independent. In fact, it is the case about the inhabitants of those two realms. The fish that live in the sea cannot live out of the sea. They're completely dependent on the sea for their existence. Whereas animals that live on the land, they can be detached from the land and still retain their existence. So the splitting of the sea was in fact the splitting and the revelation of the world of Atzilus into the world of Bia, into the world of Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, and the elevation of those worlds into Atzilus. It was that which is concealed became revealed. And the Jews went through the sea. Now, we just mentioned beforehand that they went through in 12 paths. You see, as the Jewish people manifests itself in the worlds of Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya, as those souls come down, they split into the 12 tribes of Israel. However, as they are elevated into the world of Atzilus, they actually go into their shurish, into their root. Their root is the 12 sides of the Mogen David as it's arrayed connecting the spheres in the world of Atzilus itself. And consequently, the 12 tribes of Israel, the 12 Shvatim, as they go through the sea, they are enveloped in their source. Now, when we talk about a river, we actually refer in spheres to the sphere of Bina. Bina is like a flowing river. As it says, V'nohar yotze me'Eden l'hashke sesagon. A river goes forth from Eden to water the garden. Eden is a reference to the sphere of Chochmah. The river that goes out of Eden is a reference to the Sephira of Bina. Now, Bina conceals Chochmah. And in order for there to be a revelation of the Ohr Ein Sof in Chochmah into Bina, because Chochmah is Koyach Ma, Chochmah is the power of the bittul of the Ohr Ein Sof. In order to have a revelation of the Ohr Ein Sof within Bina, one needs to draw from a higher level than Chochmah, which is called the Zayin Tachtoinim of Atik, the 7 lower levels of Atik. The Sephira of Keser, which transcends the spheres of Chochmah through Malchus, Keser meaning a crown, has an inner level and an outer level. The inner level of Atik, the inner level of Keser is called Atik, the outer level of Keser is called Arich. So when we talk about the 7 levels or lower levels in Atik, we're talking about that which transcends the Chochmah of Atzilus. When those are brought down into Chochmah, what happens is that there's a flow and a revelation into Bina, and Bina is split, the river is split into 7. Let's try and unravel all that and explain it a little more simply. In creation, we actually have in general 3 stages. We have what's called the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light, which doesn't have any configuration. Then you have creation, the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And in the middle, you have an intermediary, a Mamutza. That's called the world of Atzilus. The world of Atzilus is an intermediary between the Olamas Ha'Ein Sof, between the infinite worlds and the finite world. And that's why in the world of Atzilus, you have the emergence and the full emergence of spheres. Spheres are the mechanism which manifests different attributes of the divine. And by combining the spheres and the letters of creation, you can create. The world of Atzilus itself is kuloi elokus, is all godly. But it's godly as God manifests himself in a specific way. So therefore, we can talk about the elevation of the created worlds into Atzilus, and we can talk about the absorption of Atzilus into the higher worlds of the Olamas Ha'Ein Sof. Every intermediary necessarily has an element of both things that it's an intermediary to. So Atzilus has some connection with creation, because from the lowest sphere of Atzilus, Malchus of Atzilus, is created the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And in Atzilus itself, you have some connection with the Olamas Ha'Ein Sof, the Or Ein Sof, which transcends Atzilus, which in general we call Keser. And within Keser itself, the 7 lower spheres of Attic, which is the Pnimius, the inner dimension of Keser. So the numbers 12 and 7 actually represent the elevation of the 12, which is the 12 Shvatim, the 12 tribes of Israel, as they come down into creation, as they're elevated up into Atzilus. That's the splitting of the sea into 12. And further, then you have Bina of Atzilus as it's elevated higher into the Olamas of Ein Sof. In other words, we bring down into it oil, and this oil is represented by Chochmah, in which you have encapsulated the Or Ein Sof, and that flows down into Bina, that divides the river into 7. What does all that mean in terms of our avodah, our service of Hashem? Let's look at it in terms of dibur and machshava. Dibur is speech, machshava is thought. The sea is like speech, and the river is like thought. Speech is external, and in fact, it leads to deed. Thought is internal, and it's concealed. When we're talking about Kriyas Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea, the idea is the elevation of everything that's external into the internal. So, for example, Bitul Hara, the nullification of anything which is evil. Evil here meaning anything which is not godly. The birur, the refining of the world. That is the elevation from the worlds of Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya into and up into the world of Atzilus. In general, that's the concept of korbanos, of offerings. What is the offering? We take the mineral, water, wine, the vegetable, flour, the animal, sheep, the ox, the goat, and we bring them up on the Mizbeach, on the altar. Of course, that needs to be played out within. We are a mixture of a godly soul and an animal soul. Korbanos is the idea of offering and elevating the animal soul, refining it on a daily basis. That's why we start davening every day by saying the korbanos, because we want to take excess fat. We want to take, whether it's guilt, sin offering, whether it's daily offering, whether it's blood, which is the idea of the boiling engagement in the world, and we want to elevate it. So we want to take something which clearly is not within the realm of godliness, and we want to envelop it within godliness. We want to goad our animal soul that it should ride in tandem with the godly soul. It's very powerful, the animal soul. And in fact, Rav Tavuas B'Koach, much produce can be produced by the power of the ox. The animal soul, in fact, is extremely powerful. And when we channel it and we refine it, what we can do is to take every element and echelon of the world and make it a conduit for godliness. That's the korbanos. But then you also have the godly soul, illuminating the godly soul. That's the menorah. That's the kindling of the lights. Torah, in fact, is compared to oir. Torah, oir. Torah illuminates. And you can illuminate, as we said beforehand, in 7 different ways. Through chesed, gevura, tiferes, through kindness, through learning Torah, through overpowering the Yetzer Hara, all the 7 different branches of the menorah. But that's illumination from within and the connecting of the godly soul. It's rather like Tohu, Tikkun, Oyer, and Keli. We know that there was a prototype of the worlds of Tohu before the worlds of Tikkun. The world of Tohu, the world of chaos, was a world in which there were huge lights, Oiros Merubim, and Kelim Muatim, and few vessels. And what happened is that the vessel shattered. That was the genesis of egocentricity and ultimately evil in the world. The rectification of that is tikkun, where you have kelim rechavim, you have wide vessels, and an appropriately small amount of light which can be contained within the vessels. So you have tohu, powerful lights, and tikkun, and vessels that can contain it. You have the light, you have the vessel. In this discussion, we have the powerful korbanos, the animals which are brought up, and their power is focused and goaded and elevated on the mizbeach, on the altar. And then we have the powerful light of the menorah, which lights up our souls. In fact, the Seder, the way in which it had to be done, is first we daven and then we learn. In fact, it says a person should go mi beis ha-knesses lebeis ha-medrash. A person should first pray and then learn. First we offer up and then we illuminate, so that the combination of the two gives us a steadfast grounding for the rest of the day. It's a major difference also between the two and how we go about it. By the korbanos, by the offerings, they were just brought as they were. They didn't need any refining before they were brought on the altar. as they descended into this world, so too was it elevated. Not so by the menorah. By the menorah, the oil had to be crushed. There was a tremendous amount of preparation of crushing the olives and the extraction of the oil in order to get the best oil for the menorah. That idea of crushing is the idea of meditation and of how distant one is from how it should be. And when one meditates on that and how lowly sometimes the soul has descended into the murky quagmire of this world, it yearns tremendously for a spiritual plateau. And that's the idea of the oil. And thereafter comes the illumination of the menorah. So we have the elevation of the 12 Nesiim, the 12 princes, bringing each one with their own intention offerings to dedicate the tabernacle, the Mishkan. And thereafter, you have the kindling of the lights by Aaron HaKohen of the menorah, the elevation of the animal soul, and the attachment of the godly soul. And really, that is what prayer is all about. Classically, we understand prayer as request. Maimonides, the Rambam, says that if a person needs something, there's a mitzvah to turn to Hashem and ask for one's needs. That classically is what tefillah is. It's bakosha, it's request. On a more mystical level, tefillah, davening, has two elements. The first, birur v'zichur chaguf, the refining and elevating of the body, the animal soul, the negative character traits. This involves inner conversation from the godly soul to the animal soul in a language that the animal soul understands, that the person needs to talk to themselves and to engage with their animal soul and say to it, hey, if you go off and dive head-on hedonistically into this world, you are missing the point. It's a rachmanas. It's a tremendous pity on you. What you need to do is to use your huge powers to ride tandem with the godly soul and fulfill your purpose in creation. That's one dimension, one conversation and dimension of davening. The second is the hiskashrus hanashama, the connecting of the soul to Hashem. In fact, the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah and Shir HaShirim says in a place that sometimes the animal soul just sits by the wayside and listens to the beautiful song and connection and love of the godly soul for Hashem. The number 12 represents the bringing of the animal. The number 7 represents the higher in the mind, the illumination of Torah, and most importantly, the complete dissolution of self. This is what we call in Chassidus the difference between Bittul Hayesh and Bittul B'Metzias. Bittul Hayesh is the nullification of that which exists, of the egocentricity. That's the offering of the animal. And then you have Bittul B'Metzias, the complete illumination of the mind with godliness. That is the kindling of the menorah. It's not by coincidence that the Midrash in Mishlei tells us that Mashiach has 7 names. Why does it need 7 names? The 7 names of Mashiach, in fact, correspond to the splitting of the river into 7, which, as we explained beforehand, is the bringing down of the most innermost dimension of Attic, the highest level of the worlds which are transcendent of Atzilus, the complete dissolution of self, and the flooding, if you want, of the mind and thought with Hashem, with godliness. Or, in the words of Maimonides, as he quotes from Isaiah, Umala haaretz deas Hashem kamayim layam achasim, that in the days of Mashiach, the world will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem, like waters cover the sea. That is why the menorah is the symbol of Judaism. It means that the Jewish people are one collective soul. They may have different emphases, they may have different branches, however, they are one candle sent down to this world to illuminate the spiritual darkness. And they do so by refining from below and drawing down light from above. Aaron, his job was to kindle those lights and to make sure that they shine brightly. As it says, when you kindle the lights, it should be ad shetehei hashal heves oila me'elaha, so much so that the flame will go up by itself. Let us hope and pray that each one of us can kindle our own light, that it will shine brightly amidst all the other nearest candles of souls, so that together we will illuminate the world and shine in this world the great light of Umala Haaretz De'es Hashem, the whole world becoming full of that knowledge of Hashem, Kamayim Le'amachasim, as waters that cover the sea.